Hi, Tara Kiesling here with Together with Will, and I'm here with Tamaya Dennard, candidate for City Council. She has a very impressive resume. She was born and raised in Cincinnati. She's a product of Cincinnati Public Schools. Her passion for people, inclusion, and social justice made advocacy her occupation. She's a sought-after speaker in high schools and on college campuses. In 2014, Tamaya was named one of the 40 under 40 leaders to watch in Cincinnati by the Cincinnati Business Courier. So in case you're just joining us, this is what democracy looks like. You're meeting your city council candidate in person. You can ask questions whenever you'd like. We have a live feed going, and I'll try and keep up with them and read them live as we go, and she can answer live if she'd like. So I'm going to throw it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. First, let me thank Together We Will for having me in this platform. It's super exciting. This is my Facebook Live debut. So I've never gone on Facebook Live in all my time on Facebook. So I'm excited, and what better cause to be live on Facebook. So my name is Tamaya Dennard. I'm a candidate for Cincinnati City Council. I'm born and raised in Cincinnati, and my candidacy is not to say that Cincinnati is going to hell in a handbasket, because it's not. We're just saying that there's a lot of good things happening in Cincinnati that need to have cheerleaders, and I want to be a cheerleader for all the amazing things that are happening in our city. If you grew up in Cincinnati, if you've been here long enough, this is not the same city it was 10 to 15 years ago. However, that's not to say that everything is going great. There's a lot of parts of Cincinnati that actually need a champion, particularly around issues of poverty and communities that are marginalized. So my candidacy is just to say, hey, Cincinnati, you're doing a good job, but there's some things that we could be doing better. So in terms of running for council, I've been involved in politics for a while. I am a first-time candidate. However, I'm not new to politics. So prior to being a candidate for Cincinnati City Council, I was political director for PG Sittenfeld, who's a current Cincinnati City Council member. I was also a staffer, so I worked in the City Hall office, the City Council campaign, and also a United States Senate campaign, all for the same person. The reason why that's important is because I worked for PG for a long time, because I believed in his candidacy. I wasn't working in different spaces in politics, and so the next step, the most natural step, was actually work for myself and get elected City Council so that I could represent communities like the one I come from. My mom raised me. It's a single mom. She raised me, raised 3 kids actually. And growing up, we depended often on public assistance, health clinics, transportation. And so now there's a space in government where in Cincinnati City Council, there's amazing people on the City Council and City Hall, but there's not that one person who's championing issues around poverty and for marginalized communities. And that's kind of where I step in. We've kind of developed a following on our campaigning by using the mantra of Shirley Chisholm, one of my heroes. And Shirley Chisholm said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And that's essentially what we're trying to do with our campaign. We want to bring people to the community who otherwise have not had a voice. I mean, a lot of times people say, and particularly in politics, that people should wait their turn. But the truth of the matter is that we know that some people's turn will never come, and that's why I decided to run for Cincinnati City Council.
And that's one thing that when I first saw Tamaya speak really struck me, is your positivity. It just is so infectious, and I really love that. So I'm going to get going on the questions we have here, because we have quite a few from our group. And as I said, if you guys would send them in as we're going, I'll read them out loud. So what are your exact responsibilities to the city and your constituents? How do you plan to address the needs of all of your constituents, not just those of your party?
I think, just because I'm not as young as I used to be, actually 38 in 2 weeks, and my memory is slipping, so I better chop that question up in many bites. I think, first of all, as I think about what our exact responsibilities are to the constituency of the city of Cincinnati, I think of 3 major buckets. I think, one, we have to create a government where everybody has a voice. As I said, bringing a folding chair to the table is a metaphor for making sure that people are heard, but not as tokenism and not after decisions have already been made, but genuinely are at the table to create a city that works for them. Oftentimes when we try to solve major issues in our city, we talk, the last person, if we talk from all the people who are most affected, and actually that's where we should begin. So I promise to make sure that we have a government that's responsive and listens to everybody, but not just listen to them, brings them at the table to co-create. I think second, my responsibility is to be a good steward of taxpayers' money. I am a liberal, I'm a proud liberal, but I'm not a tax and spend liberal. I want to make sure that we're asking people for their money, we're doing the best with what we already have, and make sure we're allocating resources where they need to be allocated. Third, I think my responsibility in a space that I found just working in social innovation is we have to be creative. One thing that I find in government, having worked at City Hall for about 5 years, is that sometimes things are the way they are because they've always been that way, but sometimes they are the way they are because no one's ever bothered to change them. And so it's my responsibility to try new things that may not be new to the world. They may be new to the world, but particularly new to Cincinnati. So those are the three main buckets I see as important for anyone who's running for the Cincinnati City Council or any office anywhere.
Along those lines, how would you heal the current political divide?
It's a good question. I think one of the greatest indicators for what someone's going to do is what they've already done. So at City Hall, I've developed and maintained great relationships with people across party lines. That's super important. I'm very principled and I know what I believe. At the same time, I don't think that Democrats have all the answers. I don't think that Republicans have all the answers. So I think that's one of the biggest things that, in terms of, working across party lines, is recognizing that everybody has a voice and everybody has a perspective and everybody has a lens. And I think what happens in government in general is there's too much binary thinking. Either it has to be this way or it has to be that way. There's no room for nuanced thinking. And so I think there's a space for someone who can be a nuanced thinker and kind of get away from it's not my term, but it's a concept called absolute morality. Either if you believe Black Lives Matter, then you must not care for police. And I think that police are important, and I believe that Black Lives Matter, and we'll be vocal about that. So we have to reject the narrative of, if you hate this, you must love this, and vice versa. That's a huge part of it.
We have our first question from the audience, and it's kind of a broad question, so we might get more in detail with this question with the questions, but I'll throw it out there. What is your plan for Cincinnati?
So I think there's two things that someone has to have when they're running for government or running for office here in Cincinnati. I think you have to have like a short-term vision for what needs to take place, but I think you also have to have a long-term plan. So I want to make sure that the everyday things are taken care of, the potholes, make sure that there's pedestrian safety in our city, making sure that we're within budget every year. But also, I think there has to be a vision for what needs to happen in Cincinnati, and sometimes I feel like we lack having a long-term vision. So my long-term vision is to help mitigate poverty and what that looks like. A lot of different things. It means a more equitable transportation system. It means a more equitable lens as we look at economic development. It's thinking about that Cincinnati doesn't really have a strong affordable housing plan. We need to make sure we take care of that. So a lot of times people say equity, and it sounds really good, but what has to happen is, in order to have equity, some people have to give a little bit in order for people to get a little bit. And I think we have to really substantiate that in terms of what it looks like. So I have a goal of Cincinnati for, like I said, the here and now. What can we get done? But also thinking about, what's the city that someone like me comes from a place that I come from. Make sure everybody has opportunity. That's super important to me.
What's the best way for your constituents to communicate with you, and how can we hold you accountable?
Question. So I am probably one of the most accessible people ever. If someone emails me or calls me and says, I want to have coffee, I will do it. And again, who you will be is who you've been. So social media is always, I'm a big social media fan because I think it's a really good way to connect. Unfortunately, I love social media so much. I've exceeded my number of Facebook friends that I can have. So I try to make sure I answer inbox messages and things like that. So making sure if anyone has any questions, they can reach out to me. You can always find me at Cafe de Sales or Coffee Emporium, and I pride myself on being super approachable. And also in terms of accountability, I think I need to lay out things that people can measure. That's the biggest way to be accountable. If I say we want to create X number of affordable housing units, that's a surefire way to hold me accountable if I haven't done that. If I want to increase X number of new businesses, particularly women-owned and minority-owned businesses, hold me accountable. So I think we need to start asking politicians who run for office to give us numbers and not always speak in generalities. I mean, it's cool to be outgoing and fun. I know that everybody likes me, but I want people to ask me tough questions. From the beginning, you all asked me what question is off the table. There's no questions that are off the table for me. I'm happy and willing to answer. You never question anybody has. So if you see me around the city and people have done so, stop and ask me anything.
Speaking of ask you anything,
absolutely.
How would you suggest dealing with the opiate crisis?
So first of all, I think that addiction shouldn't be criminalized. But I think all addiction, and my one issue is not necessarily with the opiate addiction per se, but people have been struggling with addiction for years, be it opiates or crack. My issue is the disparity in the response. Opiates has more of a white face, and so A lot of times people think that the face is a little bit different, there deserves to be compassion and treatment as opposed to crack. People who are opposed to crack in the face of crack are often people who are African American. They deserve to be penalized and ostracized. And so I want to make sure that we are looking at addiction across the board, no matter what the drug is and no matter what the face of that drug is. Having said that, I think that, I like currently what the Cincinnati Fire Department is doing in terms of outreach and compassion, but I think that needs to be able to be extended to everyone. It kind of makes me sad because I know people who have, committed crimes to support other drug habits, and I don't like that there's a disparity in how they're being treated. So I like the fact that we're reaching out and being compassionate, and we're asking, you don't really want to take someone to jail, but you're probably trying to do something for their safety. So I think we need to provide treatment as an alternative, a viable alternative, and I think we're starting to do that now, but I want to make sure and I want to emphasize that that treatment needs to be extended to everyone regardless of what the drug is. Addiction is addiction is addiction, and so I'm a little bit disappointed with some of our responses in the disparity, but definitely addiction should not be criminalized no matter what the drug is.
Well, speaking of compassion, how do you feel about Cincinnati's sanctuary status, and will you keep Cincinnati a sanctuary city?
Number one, absolutely, Cincinnati must remain a sanctuary city. Now, that's one of those spaces where, what can we do? There's some limited power in terms of what we can do locally, but I like the Cincinnati police stance now of not trying to pull people over just because you think someone's illegal or checking for any sort of immigration enforcement. So I think we need to make sure that stays the case with the Cincinnati Police Department. That's something that the city can't control. But I am very much in favor of Cincinnati remaining a sanctuary city, and any policies or anything that we can put in place, anything in the city that we can control, we must. And making sure that everyone has a right to be here in the city and make a living and support their family. I just don't really know. I think the federal backlash or the perceived federal backlash of not receiving funds, I think that may be a myth right now. I don't know if that'll be substantiated, but I definitely support Cincinnati being a sanctuary city.
What programs would you propose or implement to reduce the number of incidents of gun violence in the city? Do you recognize any unjust shootings in Cincinnati in recent years?
So the first part of the question is, what can we do to mitigate violence? And one thing that has to happen, which happens sporadically, but these things are not siloed. A lot of times people are committing violence because of lack of opportunity. So lack of opportunity and training and jobs are very much connected to violence in our city. And then in terms of shootings, obviously the murder of Sam DuBose at the hand of Ray Tenzing, also Everett Howard, who was murdered by University of Cincinnati Police Department by taser. I recognize those as unjustified shootings, and take it a step further back to Timothy Thomas and Lorenzo Collins and many Roger Owens being many people who were murdered by Cincinnati Police Department. So I'm a very huge proponent of Black Lives Matter, but in terms of what that looks like, we have to transfer the movement of Black Lives Matter into actual policy and translate it into making sure, like I said, opportunities are afforded to people to make a better living. One thing that Cincinnati and Hamilton County struggles with is we have a high recidivism rate, and the recidivism rate is the rate at which people reoffend after they are out of prison. And the reason why people will have such a high recidivism rate is because of lack of opportunity. There's nothing wrong with food service jobs or construction jobs, but we also need to make sure that we're not underemploying people, because oftentimes underemployment is just as bad, if not worse, than unemployment. So how do we make sure when people come out of prison that they have dignified work? That correlates directly to the violence in our cities.
What are your thoughts on OTR gentrification?
So I have quite a few thoughts on OTR gentrification. One thing that happened, I think recently at the pizzeria Goodfellas, two gay men were in there where they were discriminated against, I think this weekend, and someone said, "This is Trump country." And a person in a Facebook group that I was a part of, he was appalled that it happened in OTR. Like somehow, with the emergence of new buildings, racism just evaporated, and we're going to be a new society. And I feel like people were forced out of Oleron. You could say what you want, but I have a very strained relationship with Oleron because on one hand, I used to live in Old Back up the bus. I lived in Old from 2006 to 2009, so I'm not speaking from complete ignorance. I lived above, I lived on Finley Market on West Elder Street. And I really feel like we messed up. And so how do we move forward and making sure even north of Liberty is not, or we're not forcing people out? And you say, well, we're not forcing people out, but we really are, because if I own a piece of property, and I know that, and I have renters, but I know that I'm just waiting for it to be bought up, I'm going to let that property probably go to crap because I don't care about the tenants, because I know I'm getting ready to cash in. So there's a lot of effects of gentrification that people don't think about. So it's like when you move into a community, how much respect do you have for the current people who live there? So I think we have to kind of pivot. I kind of feel like Over the Rhine is too far gone to talk about South of Liberty. But moving forward, how do we enact more equitable economic development policies? So that looks like making sure we have affordable housing units. And if a developer wants some money from the city, we got to put some strings attached to it. So if you want X number of dollars, you have to, create X number of affordable housing units. But the caveat is we have to make sure those affordable housing units don't look different from the other housing units. That happens a lot too. Like, yeah, I'll throw up some affordable housing and it looks like affordable housing. So how do we make sure that we hold developers more accountable? How do we as a city, rethink not just tax abatements, but we also think about rent abatements? Over the Rhine is one of those communities where it's past the tipping point of needing a tax abatement. Some communities need tax abatements in order to make sure that we encourage development. But Over the Rhine is one of those communities where we don't need it. So how do we take a lot of the tax money that we're losing in Over the Rhine and make sure we're equitable about other communities? So I have a lot of strong feelings about OTR gentrification.
What are your plans for public transportation, speaking of OTR?
A lot of plans for transportation. So this is one of those questions where, it's kind of that absolute morality that you must love the streetcar, you must hate the streetcar. I think the streetcar could be a good thing, but my focus is on buses. And buses are important because more people rely on the buses every day. And it's not to say they don't care about the streetcar. I think the streetcar is great. So we have to make sure that we have equitable transportation system. So in Cincinnati, I think we're using the same routes and approaches to to transportation that we used for 30 and 40 years. We need to start looking at, intra-city express routes. We need to start looking at 24-hour bus routes. My mom is a returning citizen, and when she, got out of jail, the only company that will hired her for a second shift job, and there was no transportation. So, and there's also, when you get to those second and third shift jobs, there's also a pay differential. You get higher pay. So how can we make sure we connect people to jobs? So not just those second and third shift jobs, but those jobs out in Sharonville and Hebron and Blue Ash. So I think we need to make sure that we're thinking about transportation in a new way. We have a lot of express routes from the suburbs to the city, but we don't have those intra-city express routes. So what we're implicitly saying is that people in the suburbs, their time is more valuable than the people who actually live in the city. I live in Kent, Washington, and if I want to go to Kenwood, it probably takes me about 2.5 hours to get to Kenwood. That just shouldn't be. So how do we rethink transportation, rethink routes, based on where we see the most traffic, where people are the most ridership, and make some changes. But right now, we're not thinking about everybody involved in the space of public transportation.
So if you're just joining us, we're talking with City Council candidate Tamaya. If you'd like to send in any kind of question, we'll be reading it live here, so don't forget to send us your questions. And as soon as this video is finished being live, you'll be able to watch the beginning of it if you're just tuning in now. So next question, what are your views on education?
So I am an unashamed, unapologetic public school fan. I graduated from public schools, Cincinnati Public Schools. I graduated from Aiken High School. I've been in public schools my whole life. Graduated from the University of Cincinnati College of Business. So one thing that disappoints me relative to the University of Cincinnati is that the lack of students from Cincinnati Public Schools that are on main campus. And I'm not speaking to someone, I was an honor student, and by the grace of God, I graduated from college. But, I think that we have to start looking at education holistically. There are a lot of students, back up the bus. The city controls not much in education. It's two separate bodies, two separate budgets, two separate entities. However, we share the same constituency, and people move in and out of the community based on, based on school system. So I think Cincinnati owes, we have an opportunity and an obligation to make sure our neighborhoods are developed so that people don't have to bust their kids halfway across the city. Every community deserves a thriving neighborhood school. So I am a huge fan of Cincinnati public schools and public schools in general. I'm not saying that they're perfect. There's lots of things that we could be doing better, but I'm a big fan of public education.
So leading into that, how will you improve accessibility in Cincinnati, and not only with education, but busing, phones instead of relay, accessibility of jails and city hall, interpreters and captions for live events?
So I think there's a recognition that that's more of like, as I think about opportunities and areas where we exercise privilege. And, you know, we have to think about people who aren't like us, and sometimes that's pretty tough. I think when you think about privilege and justice, we have to make sure that, you know, things like I was talking to someone yesterday where someone's daughter is blind and she has difficulty navigating our current transportation system. Have we stopped and thought about what that looks like for someone who's blind or someone who is hearing impaired? We have not. I think we try. We have. Can I say half-ass? Because we half-ass. I guess I just said it. We half-ass on you know, some remedies here and there, but I don't think we're really trying to design systems that work for people who are not like the privileged many. That includes thinking about access and opportunities for people who come from the communities that I come from, people who, you know, our trans community. We're not thinking about, again, people who have, you know, even how parking meters are. You know, some people who are you know, shorter in stature can access some of the parking meters. I mean, we're not thinking about, are we constantly thinking about, outside of what we have to do by law, we're thinking about how our spaces are accessible for people who are not, you know, mobile, who have limited mobility. So I think we have a lot of ways to go in terms of accessibility, but I think that's also a part of bringing more voices to the table. In the city of Cincinnati, we do a lot of quantitative research, and that's cool, but we need to start thinking about qualitative data and hearing people's stories so that we can design systems better based on the stories that people tell us, the things that they're experiencing inside our city.
So do you support legislation guaranteeing members of the LGBTQ community the ability to adopt? And this is kind of a longer question, so I don't know if you want me to break it
No,
up.
that's good.
Okay. Would you oppose legislation limiting this right? Do you support legislation guaranteeing transgender individuals the ability to use the public restrooms in which they feel safest? And would you oppose legislation limiting this right?
So I fully support LGBT couples' rights to adopt. I mean, that's a no-brainer for me. I mean, that's not anything to think about. In terms of bathrooms for people who are transgender, I think that it's really, really, really important that people use the restroom that they are most comfortable in. And because it's not just about bathrooms, it's bathrooms like this. You can just look at you go in on bathrooms and get caught up in that, and that's fine. But if you can't go to a restroom or a bathroom that's comfortable for you, you're not going to, you know, that affects your ability to work, that affects your ability to get an education. So it's not just about bathrooms. And I read this meme, it's one of my favorite memes in the last few months, but it says it's not just about water fountains, just like it's just not about bathrooms, and that's how I feel strongly. So definitely support, and I would not pass any legislation that limits an LGBT couple ability to adopt. I know some people who are transgender and bisexual and gay who are amazing parents, so I just don't even know how to even wrap my head around them not being able to have a child, and would not pass any legislation to restrict someone's ability to use a bathroom that they are comfortable in.
So what is your plan on inclusion?
It's huge. So inclusion is huge in our city. This goes with accessibility. So one of my favorite quotes is, I heard someone say that diversity is inviting someone to the party, but inclusion is actually allowing them to dance. And I think as we think about inclusion, we have to get beyond like just checking the box. Here in Cincinnati, we have this thing where we just, oh yeah, we got the black group in the room, let's check the box. Or we have, oh, the gay group's here, let's check the box. We have to take it a step further, and that's what we do here in Cincinnati. So I think in terms of inclusion, it's not just about the amount of money you're spending on like government contracts. How many new businesses are you bringing into the fold that are that are not, white male owned. And so I have no problem with white men. I love white men. My campaign manager is a lovely white man, but I don't think that we should have a government full of white men. And so that goes back to our mantra of, bringing bring a folding chair to the table. Until we have a city where everyone has equal opportunity, equitable opportunity, we're going to still have huge cycles of poverty. We're going to our communities. We're still going to have huge disparities that exist in our city. So inclusion is, again, it's not something I actually think about, but because it's just a part of my DNA. But I had to learn that everybody's not in the same space. This weekend, I was at the Cincinnati Neighborhood Summit, and the theme was equity. And it really made me understand that everybody isn't in the same space. So how do we bring people along in a way that we're not demonizing people? So what I find is that there's some people who want to be more inclusive. They don't know how. There's some people who don't know, don't care. So we have to be careful not to throw everybody in the same bucket. There's some people who want to be inclusive, and we have to create opportunities and spaces where they can be inclusive. And then sometimes that's creating those spaces where they can ask the questions that sometimes we don't get anywhere because people are afraid to ask certain questions. So how do we create safe spaces where people can ask questions to gain better understanding? We have to do better about that.
How will you support diversity training for LEOs and first responders in dealing with mental illness and unconscious bias?
So I think, implicit bias and I guess LEOs as law enforcement officers, I think that one thing that has to happen is cultural competencies are important. One thing that former Cincinnati Police Chief Blackwell did, where I wish we would continue, is that he had liaisons in different communities. He had different liaisons in different communities, but moreover, he actually had new recruits to like service hours before he actually put them on the street in different communities. So it's very hard to take someone who comes from maybe a rural or suburban white community and put them in the middle of Avondale and expect them to, I guess, by osmosis, learn everything they're supposed to learn in terms of the cultural competencies to survive so in that community, and not just survive, but be a friendly officer to the people that they serve. So I think that's one of the things that we can do. I think also a lot of police officers don't have the correct training as it relates to how to deal with young people. I think that's huge. So we have to put some training in place, and programs are great, but at the root of a lot of the issues are racism and a lack of understanding of other cultures. So unless we're willing to, deal with racism head on, programming is just putting, to use Barack Obama's term, lipstick on a pig. You know what I mean? It's just, you're just going to, you're not really dealing with the issue. So we have to continue to really deal with the root causes and not just all these band-aids that we're doing around the police department. A lot of people are scared to address the police department because they're afraid of certain things. I think the police are great. I love police officers, but that doesn't mean we can't tell them when they're not doing something right.
So that kind of leads into another question. What is your plan for taking on racial healing in this community, and how does it differ from what has been done in the past?
So I think that we have to create the environments where people can, ask the tough questions and create a safe space. I facilitate a lot of for a living. That's my job, to facilitate a lot of spaces where we're talking about racism and equity and equality. And I think that just people are in different spaces. And so if someone isn't kind of where you are in terms of their being progressive or having the same ideology that you do, we can't attack them. We have to make sure we bring people along. One of the things for me that was nails on the chalkboard, I am as pretty much anti-Donald Trump as you can get. But one thing that drove me crazy during the presidential election, when people would talk about the exit polls, they would always say uneducated white men. And I thought that was like unfair. And I don't think you're not going to get people to talk with you if you keep calling someone uneducated white man. That's just a terrible term. I'm not, a white male, but I took umbrage to that. I just thought that was not a good thing to say. So how do we use language that's, more welcoming and more appropriate? In order, you have to create the space where people want to talk. And so, one of the things I do every day is I try to make sure I'm, creating spaces either because of my job or just by virtue of who I am, spaces where people can come to me and say, I have friends who say, they sit down with me for coffee and they ask me, I want to do this, but I'm not sure how to approach this. I want to, reach my hand out to this community, but what should I do? And I field those questions happily, because those are the first steps in order to think about racial healing. What hasn't happened in Cincinnati in the past is that there's a deep mistrust in government, and people ask people how they feel about racism, but they don't really mean it because their policies don't reflect that. So that's super huge to, build trust and remain there. You can't just build this trust and then go away, then that trust collapses. Because sometimes in our angst to help situations, when we don't stay around, we actually hurt racial healing in our city more than anything else. So it also starts with economic justice and having a social justice lens on policy here in the city of Cincinnati.
What will you do to support women's health care in Southwest Ohio, and how will you support Planned Parenthood in Southwest Ohio? So
I'm a huge supporter of Planned Parenthood. When I first moved back to Cincinnati, after living in Atlanta, I didn't have health insurance, and I went to Planned Parenthood because I didn't have any money, and it wasn't about any abortions or anything like that. It was just screenings, checkups, physicals, and I got the best care. And they didn't treat me differently because I didn't have any money or didn't have any insurance. After I got insurance, I actually remained a patient of Planned Parenthood because of the level of care that I received. So forever will I be a fan of Planned Parenthood. What people don't realize is that people who don't know that, I guess it's 1 in 5 women, 20% of women in Ohio will rely on Planned Parenthood for things outside of abortion. Abortion is small in terms of what the services they provide. So there's not a whole lot that I could do from a local level on Planned Parenthood. However, I will make sure I'm being as supportive as humanly possible to make sure their doors stay open. And again, it's about access and opportunity and making sure that every person has a right to health care. So before Obamacare, Planned Parenthood was taking care of our community and taking care of the least of us, and I will forever be indebted to them for what they did for me, and to make sure that from a city perspective, from a legislative perspective, I'll do everything I can to support them.
So now we have a question from the audience. You have worked for PG Sittenfeld. How will that help you on city council?
I'm an insider but an outsider, so I know, how to work, through City Hall. I know what departments do what. So having that experience is going to be huge. I will come in day one ready to go and to work, knowing, if I have an idea, knowing where to go, knowing how the legal department works, knowing how transportation works, knowing how Department of Transportation Engineering works, knowing about, what I need for parks. So that helps me a lot in actually being in that space. But I don't have I'm still an outsider, which is nice. So PG was a good person. He's a friend first, and we were friends before we ever started working together. And I like that, he stays above the fray at City Hall and gets things done. And that's the kind of council member I'll be. I'm very principled, and I'll take on some tough issues. But as long as you love Cincinnati, I can work with you regardless if you're a Republican or a Democrat.
So now we're going to kind of move on to the environment. What is the current condition of Cincinnati's water treatment plants? Are they overloaded? How does this affect the water in the Mill Creek and Ohio River? What plans do you have regarding the ongoing battle between the city and county over upgrading our sewer system?
So I think,
Mouthful there.
Yeah, I know, right? I'll take the last question first, because I sat down, I've been spending a lot of time actually learning about MSD and waterworks, and I think it's something that's a huge issue. It's like what they call a BHAG, a big, hairy, issue. And I think the problem is that a lot of people don't really understand how MSD works. And I'm still learning how MSD works. But I think we have to keep our focus on what's best for people. And sometimes the city and the state do this stance of who's going to blink first. And I think the nice thing is now that the county commission has kind of shifted over to having a Democratic majority, I think that'll soon change. So I think one thing I don't like about the current structure of waterworks is that if someone, and I'm always thinking about people who are impoverished or marginalized or experiencing poverty, if someone is, the Greater Cincinnati Waterworks doesn't have a plan right now, a payment plan for people who can't pay their water bills, and that's huge. So we have to make sure it's accessible to everyone. In terms of how we get the city and the county to work together better, we got to end the stare down and think about what's right for everyone. I think right now the water treatment plant is great. We have some of the best drinking water in the country, and that's going well. But I think the rates of MSD have increased substantially, but I haven't really given a good answer as to why. So people are seeing their MSD bills double, and in some cases triple, but there's not a good explanation. And I think the MSD needs to do a better job of communicating to people and recognizing that MSD and Waterworks are not the same, but they bill the same. I think Waterworks bills for both of them. So I think there needs to be some more education for not only the people, but the people who are elected officials, because sometimes I think they don't even know what the hell's going on with MSD and Waterworks.
What programs or initiatives would you support to make Cincinnati more environmentally responsible? Can local electricity be sourced from wind, solar, water instead of coal and natural gas?
So solar power, I think, it's a viable option, but it's also very expensive. So I think it can be. To answer your question, I think solar is a good alternative. It is expensive. There's some things that we can do to kind of get us there. We're not going to jump to solar power overnight, but one of the things that we can start thinking about is, in terms of solar power, I think it's like a really good idea to help people. Like I think the Community Action Agency helps people to pay their power bills, and as well they should. But at some point, we have to start not just keep handing over checks to pay people's power bill, but also start to look at how buildings are actually being built, and maybe we can start with city-owned buildings to make them, build or develop solar energy around city-owned buildings first, just to, maybe not all of them, but just kind of prototype and see how that will work out. At some point, though, we need to start looking at developers and start demanding a higher environmental responsibility handing over a higher environmental responsibility to them, so that so that they can start, making sure buildings are energy efficient. Right now in the city of Cincinnati, I think you can get a 15-year abatement if you go LEED Silver, and that was really good 15 or 20 years ago. I think maybe 15 years ago, but I think we should. But it's like low-hanging fruit. You don't have to do much to get LEED Silver 15-year tax abatement. So we might need to look at escalating that to gold certification, so that we can make sure that we're incentivizing developers to make sure that buildings are energy efficient. The thing that Cincinnati, we want to make sure we develop strong business relationships and continue to develop business relationships with developers. But we have to realize that, we have the carrot, and if people want to get money from the city, we got to leverage that to our advantage of making sure that we're the most environmentally responsible city that we can be. We've done really well, and I think we have a council now that's very much environmental friendly, but I think we're still kind of hanging on to accomplishments and achievements from an environmental standpoint that we had, 15 years ago. And I think we need to kind of decrease our footprint in Cincinnati, and there's ways to do it by utilizing city-owned buildings first.
We have quite a few questions from the audience here. Can a tax rate be so high that it's not acceptable?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're talking about income tax rates, or I just want to make sure I'm clear on what kind of...
I'm not totally sure if that's income tax or if it's referring to MSD's rates. If someone wrote that question.
Yeah, I want a little bit of clarity, because I think about, one of the things I talked about earlier is making sure that we're being good stewards of people's money, and that's super important. So we're going back and we're asking someone for, a hike in pay on taxes. I want to make sure we're actually maximizing and doing everything that we can with the money that we already have. Sometimes the issue that I find it's not always a question of more money. If you ask any organization what they need, they'll more often than not say we'll need more money. But it's not always more money. It's, are we asking the right questions? Are we testing our assumptions? And are we being good stewards of what we already have? So those are the three questions I would ask before I just say, hey, let's just increase taxes on something, anything.
Kroger's and other grocery stores are leaving the Black community. What is your plan to help?
So we have, food deserts, and I struggle with this because I very much want. I just think that people should be able to access fresh produce in their communities, and you shouldn't be, basically right now, winners and losers in terms of health are being chosen based on a zip code and what you can afford. And that just shouldn't be. And I'm not just singling out Kroger, although Kroger's one of them, but there's other grocery stores in town that could also help to mitigate food deserts. So I was disappointed that Kroger left Walnut Hills, especially because when I lived in Atlanta, there was a Kroger store that was in downtown Atlanta that was next to City Hall. It wasn't as big as the Kroger store in Walnut Hills, but it was a small grocery store. It was a Kroger store, but people could get, what they needed, like dairy and produce and, just little items in their own community. So I'm definitely disappointed that Kroger didn't look at a more viable option in Walnut Hills, but Kroger's not the only one. I'm super excited about the Clifton Gaslight market, but every community deserves the ability to get fresh fruit and groceries regardless of their zip code. And it's the city's job to encourage economic development. So how do we incentivize a grocery store to be in the city? So the city has a huge responsibility to play. I mean, I know, the UC Coreyville Kroger is new and shiny. We want everybody to go there, but we can't just forget about, Walnut Hills or Avondale or all these other places. So I challenge Kroger and other grocery stores to come up with a model that is better suited for those communities. One thing that we have to do is we can't be afraid to redesign the system and meet people where they are. So maybe that big box wouldn't work in that community, but it's incumbent upon them as good stewards of the community to make sure that every community has a viable grocery store. It's both the private community and the public community, private sector and the public community's responsibility to do that. So definitely disappointed that Kroger left. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't feel like Kroger, I lived in East Walnut Hills for a long time. They didn't put a lot into that store. I know they left, they said it wasn't a viable Kroger because sometimes, they didn't have everything I needed. Sometimes I go in there at, 5 o'clock and there were 2 lines open. I mean, they tried to do some things, but at that point, people have been socialized and it was too late. So they have to do everything in their power to make sure a store is viable, and I don't think Kroger did that in Walnut Hills.
What makes you different from other candidates?
I think my ability to build genuine relationships is huge, and I am. I know everybody. I'm able to. If I disagree with somebody, I'm more of a convener and consensus builder. I don't back down from my stance, but I'm also a person who is very. I have an ability to look at things from a different points of view. Like even if I disagree with you, I could still, try to meet you halfway in terms of your thinking. So what makes me different is I have an ability to relate to people, and that's just because of the journey of my life. I mean, I grew up, impoverished, but also have a corporate background, which is very different than our current city council members. You have people who maybe have one or the other, but I have both, and so I bring both of those worlds into one space, so I'm able to look at the complexity of an issue and not just looking at how it affects one community, but how it affects the whole, whether I'm a part of that, whether that I represent that community or not. And that's what makes me different. I'm also genuine. Who I am is who I am, and I'm authentic. I don't say things that are politically expedient. If you ask me a question, I'm going to tell you the truth, and that's how I've always been. Much to the chagrin of my mom, I've always been a person who told people how I feel, but I can do it in a way where I don't make you feel bad. I'm not demonizing you, but I can tell you if you're wrong and how to bring you along. At the same time, I can accept when I'm wrong and be brought along. So that's kind of what makes me different than most candidates, probably all candidates.
Well, that leads really well into the next question. It's a little bit of a longer question. I'm assuming you're running as a Democrat. That's an audience member. While I identify as progressive liberal, I'm finding that I often don't feel represented by the party. I know you'll stand up to conservatives on certain issues, but are you willing to stand up to your own party if you disagree with whatever the party line is?
That's a great question. So I worked for PG Sittenfeld, who ran for United States Senate last year. And a huge problem that I had was that PG was a great candidate. He was the best Senate candidate in the Democratic Party, but he was overlooked because Ted Strickland was more established, and the party endorsed Ted Strickland. And that was eye-opening for me, because I'm thinking he has great ideas, he's bright, but the party just basically told him to wait, and I had big issues with that. So yeah, I am willing to stand up to my own party. I'm already doing that now to a point where some people have been having issues with me because I don't think just because you call yourself progressive that means you're a progressive. And people can take that as they may, but people are like, oh, why are you getting up progressive? Because a lot of times people who are progressive, they're part of the problem when they're not really recognizing inequity. So I am very much going to stand up to anybody. I don't care what their party affiliation is. I've already started doing that. That's who I am now as a candidate, but absolutely, I am unashamed to be progressive and liberal, but I'm also not afraid to call people out, but in a way where if I have a problem with someone, I'll come to them and say, hey, I don't agree with you on this issue. I won't call you out on Facebook. I'll call you. I'll meet with you. But I think you have to. I have a lot of disagreements with the party, particularly as it relates to the black community. I feel like the Democratic Party is really super white, and they're not inclusive of African Americans, particularly young African Americans. And I've told that to David Pepper, who's the chair of the Democratic Party himself, and we've had discussions about this. So I'm not afraid to be who I am and to be authentic. So absolutely, I would have no issue standing up, because sometimes I've had difficulty. I feel like I was too progressive for the party, but there's no way in hell I'm going to be anything close to a Republican. And I have too strong of values to be. I can't be independent either, because I have to stand for something. So I'm definitely not just anything wrong being independent, but I'm a proud Democrat.
Are there any ideas from your time in Atlanta that you might consider bringing to Cincinnati from that experience in Atlanta? One
thing that sticks out to me the most from my time in Atlanta is the number of black companies who had access to government contracts. That made a huge difference in the economy of Atlanta. It was nothing to see a huge black construction company. Here it's the minority. There was it was par for the course. It was normal. So I think in terms of how Atlanta did development with black contractors was huge, and I would like to see us do more of that. It wasn't just in Atlanta. It wasn't just about using the same companies over and over again. They were constantly trying to figure out how to bring new businesses into the fold. So that was huge. I like the way that Atlanta had great leadership at City Hall who believed in being inclusive. That's something that's huge. Also, the transportation system in Atlanta at the time, I thought was great. We had light rail, so we had the trains and we had buses, and they worked well together, and it helped to. Couldn't do anything about the traffic in Atlanta, but it was good that we had both of those systems working together. So I think a stronger transportation system would do well here in Cincinnati. I'm not sure what the state of MARTA, which is their transportation system, is now. At the time, it was a great system, and I think we can use that. And it went all over the place, and so I wish that we had that more in Cincinnati.
What are your thoughts on homelessness? And this may be one of the last few questions we ask tonight.
Sure. So homelessness it's a huge issue as we think about, again, poverty. But I don't know if we've genuinely brought people who experience homelessness to the table, help design against homelessness, and we have to do that. As I think about the gentrification that's happening in our communities and displacement of people, that's huge. Being homeless, we have to think of either, I don't know if it's like emergency housing. We have to come up with some better housing solutions for people who are homeless. A lot of times, people who are homeless, the assumption is if you're homeless, there's some sort of it's like we criminalize being homeless, and we criminalize being poor, and that definitely has to change. But it's only going to change when we invite people who have experienced it, who are currently or formerly experiencing it, to the table to actually help design systems and redefine what the systems are to help people who are experiencing those issues.
So do you have any closing remarks tonight?
I just want to thank Together We Will, for allowing me to have this opportunity. I was a little bit nervous, still a little bit nervous, but I'm so thankful. And probably my campaign manager's off to the side, shaking his head and forgetting everything I talked about, because I do that when I get nervous. Sometimes I ramble, sometimes I forget. But I'm excited for the opportunity. I want to represent Cincinnati. I think I represent someone who's never been at City Hall before. I like to engage people in a different way, and I'm not saying anything bad against the current council members. I always have to add that caveat because politicians have egos and they're very sensitive. So I want to make sure my candidacy is not saying that City Council is going in the wrong direction, but it's actually we need to make sure that as we look at who's the most faithful voting bloc in our country, it's black women. But often the things that affect black women are at the bottom. And so I want to not only just come to City Council because I'm a black woman, but also I feel like there's a lot of things I think about daily. I'm a pro-business Democrat, but being pro-business Democrat doesn't mean I have to be anti-social. So I'm very strong-willed, and I have a lot of strong principles on social issues and equity. And I think people think they know what equity means, but not really. So I want to be that voice that, make sure that everybody has a say at City Hall. I represent all sides of Cincinnati in one person. I'm corporate. I grew up impoverished. I'm a product of Cincinnati Public Schools. I have a business degree. So I think that's the main thing I want to let people know. I'm interested in putting people over politics and not kind of getting down in the mud and making sure that this is a city opportunity for everyone. And right now, it is not. So there's two Cincinnatis right now. There's a Cincinnati that's really struggling, and there's a Cincinnati that's flourishing. And there's no one to kind of understand both so that we can bring both those sides of Cincinnati together. So thank you again for the opportunity to learn more about me. Go to my website, which is tamayadennard.com. And then also feel free to inbox me for coffee if you want to just sit down and talk about some more platforms or some more of my ideas one-on-one. So thank you all for tuning in, and I look forward to meeting you along the campaign trail between now and November 7th. So thank you.
Well, thank you for being here, and thank you all for watching. If you joined us a little bit late, just wait a few minutes when this video ends, and it'll be uploaded, and you'll be able to watch it in its entirety. And again, thank you for being here.